Hi, and welcome to Ward 13. And on my right is Ireland's answer to the question, who is the Jim O'Connell of Manchester, New Hampshire?
Who is he? He's an enigma wrapped in a mystery. What was that again? A mystery wrapped in an enigma? I don't know, whatever it was. I've forgotten the quotation.
Was that Stalin? Or because Churchill said about the Germans, they're either at your throat or at your feet. I think he was talking about Stalin.
Yeah, it might have been.
Nobody really knew him before they actually met him.
Yeah,
what was it, Casablanca in 43? And,
yes.
FDR had to go stay with Stalin at his casa.
Really?
Because of a threat, which probably the Soviets created themselves.
I was reading something. You mentioned FDR, and I, my hometown in Ireland. I should have known this already, and perhaps I did, and I'd forgotten it. But FDR actually visited there in 1917. Yeah.
Oh, as the assistant secretary of the
Navy, because at the very outbreak of when the Doughboys, as they were called, when the United States joined the war in 1917, one of the first actions was the Navy sent a flotilla of destroyers to Cork Harbour to operate out of Cork Harbour.
Originally, that U-boat menace. That's
originally 10 or 12, and then eventually later 24. And there were 24 destroyers based out of Cork Harbour, as was the entire North Atlantic Fleet of the British Navy. So even though the Navy was based in Portsmouth, headquartered in Greenwich, but based in Portsmouth, but they were moved to Cork Harbour, which is the second largest natural harbour in the world, a place I'm going to be in a month from now. I'm very proud to be there.
And which they didn't have the facilities in World War II.
No, because
which was a big loss.
And it was because the British withdrew from the ports in Ireland in 1938,
and Ireland was neutral.
It had been neutral since 22, but as part of the neutrality agreement of the Ireland getting its independence, or at least that part which got its independence from Britain at that time. In a less well-known fact, the British retained occupation of 3 garrison towns or ports in Ireland.
I didn't know that.
Up until 1938. So long after they had left, and there was an independent government in Dublin, etc., and the Irish Republic had been established, and under your friend De Valera and all that stuff, they retained Cork Harbour and the facilities in Cork Harbour. There were dry docks there. There was a major naval facility there, and they retained, which was called Queenstown, now called Cove, the port of Kingstown, which is now called Dunleary, or the Fort of O'Leary. Kingstown, which was just outside Dublin, was held, and also a base on Lough Foyle up by Derry. So they kept those 3, and it was only in 1938 that there are photographs and video of the British troops. Well,
you mean?
Film.
Yeah.
Film of the British leaving the facilities in Cork Harbour, and it was a cause of great worry and consternation to the newly independent Ireland that a year and a few months after the departure of the British from from those facilities, war broke out. World War II broke out for the British in September of 1939, and so there was a great De Valera, and I was worried that they would come rolling right back into the facilities that they had just abandoned a year and a half before.
It would have helped the convoy system to have been there.
It certainly would. But in the end, they were sort of covert or less. There was covert's the wrong word. Perhaps covert too. But there was cooperation between the Free State, or as it was called. Some would call it the government of the Republic of Ireland and British authorities. It was funny that that Allied airmen who landed or crash landed in Ireland during World War II were repatriated during World War II.
Oh, they were? Because in Switzerland you weren't.
Yeah, well, they were, but it wasn't official.
Oh,
whereas the Luftwaffe, when they crash landed they were retained in
even Americans went to Switzerland. I thought they were kept. But talking about the last Ward 13 was celebrating the last refuge for scoundrels, which is patriotism.
Yes.
When's Ireland's? Does Ireland have its own 4th of July? Like Canada has July 1st, which used to be Confederation Day, and then it was Dominion Day when I was a kid.
Yeah. So no, Ireland doesn't have. It celebrates the Easter Rising on Easter Sunday each year, because that commemorates the initial. Though unsuccessful rebellion of lots of the great Irish patriots like Pearse and others at the post office in Dublin in 1916.
The GPO.
The GP, General Post Office.
They put James Connolly up he was wounded, and they put him in a chair before they shot him.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And De Valera, he was an American. Is that what saved him?
I'm not sure what saved him, but he
got caught.
Yes, he was more minor, but he was avoided. But they did end up, and the other thing was they learned afterwards. They obviously didn't understand, which is surprising for the British, the psychology of executing a new famous name every 3 or 4 days. I mean, if they killed them all the first week,
you'd think after 200 years, the people in the dock giving those speeches, the famous Irish that were hung.
See, they were used to murdering colonists, people in the colonies who nobody knew and cared about, because they could murder 100 Zulus in a village someplace, and it wouldn't make the national press. But it was a little harder to do with people in Dublin. But some of the funny stories, not to prolong this, but just as an example of Easter 1916, one of the little vignettes that they stormed the post office. Like nowadays, well, in the late 20th century, people stormed television studios.
Sean O'Casey was like, when he knew what was going on, was aghast because they weren't ready.
They weren't ready.
But they did.
Well, Ireland had been getting
ready.
Ireland.
It's like the Irish.
It had been getting ready for 700 years, right? There's numerous, the rebellion of 1803, 1798. There's numerous efforts at rebellion that were failed for one reason or another, and 1916 was ultimately too. But it did cause enough. It was the beginning point. It was the catalyst that caused independence. But just as an example of in the post office at the time, in Irish history, you're sort of taught this was this gallant thing and brave men who stood up against the largest empire in the world, and that's true, of course. Yeah. But there's a wonderful piece about one of many at the time, the telephonist in the GPO, and there were very few telephones in 1916. But you can imagine these people with the earphones, and they pulling the plugs out and putting them in. I'll put you through to Mr. Smith, kind of thing. And she was a staunch civil servant, right? And her duty was to man the phones and never let them unmanned, and so she refused to leave. So you have the leaders of the rebellion, they had to go and get Pearse to go in and try to argue with this woman who wouldn't leave at the point of a gun. It's like, what, so she's fine. I will not, I'll never let the phone system fail. And so, anyway.
Then comes the Black and Tans.
Yeah.
And I think Sean O'Casey, of course, wrote several great plays. But I think my favorite of his is The Shadow of a Gunman. Because of there's a lot of the humor and the irony when they mistake him for a gunman. But then the Black and Tans come in and humiliate him and reveal what he is.
Well,
and the horror of it. But then you had the humor of the Irish. I remember Pauline Kael was probably the great American film critic of her time, and probably the greatest film critic ever. talking about Ryan's daughter, which was David
Oh,
Lean,
yeah,
saying
yeah,
she,
yeah.
she hated the movie, and then she said, "This isn't. This is supposed to be about Ireland. There's no humor. There's no jokes.
It's not
it's
written
so
by an
un-Irish.
Irish.
It's not about Ireland at all."
On another matter, one of the none of these things happen in isolation, right? So when the 1916 happens, we have there's a
World War One's
World
going
War
on.
One is going on, and,
Brutal war.
and so the back story to all of this, which is lost when people sort of look at Irish history in isolation, as we did growing up in Ireland, because the people who came home.
How many Irish were in the war?
Thousands,
they were
tens of thousands.
That was considered part of the United Kingdom.
The Irish, the nationality who won the most Victoria Crosses, which is the highest level of valour.
Right.
Considering the size of Ireland being less than a tenth of the population of England, the people who won the most Victoria Crosses in World War One were the Irish.
Doesn't surprise me.
Not in comparative terms, in actual terms. And the second were the Scottish.
Yeah.
Because you go back and look at things like, oh, what a lovely war and stuff like that, and
Then
you
the
go to
Aussies.
Gallipoli and things like that, and they would send, the colonial troops were just sent over the top into machine gun fire and were lost.
I
the
think it
thousands.
was one of the prime ministers from the Dominions. It might have been from New Zealand, because it was in World War II that the Australian prime minister despised Churchill and put his lot in with FDR and the Americans.
Right. Well, because Churchill had been...
Because of the memories of World War One and
yes.
all what had happened, the bungling of the war with the Japanese in the first days. But I think it was either New Zealand... Because I don't think it was the Canadian PM physically attacked Lloyd George, because
really?
they just massacred colonial troops. And in World War II, they were doing it too. The Canadians did. But the Australians were prized. They're prized soldiers to this day, even now.
Yeah.
And they would just throw them into a meat grinder, like Marines. So
Well,
you take the Marines and throw them in.
So to bring that up to today, as a piece of international news, the stuff that doesn't really make it to the, people in the watching TV here don't see these things, but because it's not carried on the national press. But there's a major
With the
war
British
games.
ambassador?
No, there's a major war games going on right now. The largest in some
NATO?
years is going on. No, in the South Pacific. So it's Australia, the Australian, and not just the Navy, but the Australians, New Zealanders, the United States, and the British, which really surprised me.
Usually
the British,
they're not.
The British Navy are there. And interestingly, there's
The Royal Navy.
The Royal Navy. Boom, boom. And so... anyway, that's
Royal,
more like
they're all Royal Navy. Royal Australia.
Britannia, rule the seas. Anyway, there's the reason there's talk about it yesterday and today is there's a Chinese spy ship, which has gone down north in the waters north of Papua New Guinea.
It went down.
It's not gone down in that sense.
Has
been going heading southwards to where these major exercises are going on. 28,000 troops and sailors are exercising and doing everything, amphibious landings and ship-to-ship assistance and all the stuff you would do in this war game.
I haven't even heard about it.
Yeah, and but the Chinese have sent for the first time. They have to, because they're expanding their military. Yeah. They've sent this large spy ship, bristling, like a hedgehog bristling with antennas, is heading down to eavesdrop.
Right, and then you play those games.
Yeah, so
you get close, and then
so
you go
we look
in
at while we're busy talking about we're looking inwards and drawing ourselves inwards. In the real world, you have the Chinese spying on the Anzac troops and groups, and our military is down there, planning and practicing and perfecting their methods, etc. So, but the fact that any of this goes on, it doesn't get mentioned. Because we don't care. It's obviously not, we're more interested in some cat getting stuck in a tree somewhere in Merrimack.
Well, I don't watch news much anymore, ever since the Mueller report, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
And
I get tired of watching the same news over and over again.
I don't watch the Democratic debates. Is there any talk about foreign policy?
I don't know. I haven't watched them.
See, I'm not even interested in it.
I'm interested in the future of the country, and I'm interested, but
this is a media circus.
There are people who seem to me like there's some good people there, I think, but I'm not ready to talk about any one of them in their particulars. But I think the thing that bothers me about the whole, like the Democratic debates, just like the Republican debates 2 years ago, ago, or 3 years ago now.
Those were more fun.
Yeah, but this
because of the clown.
The clown. But this idea that one man or woman is meant to encapsulate all the wisest decisions and have all the right policies across the full spectrum of activity in the United States, and we're meant to accept that person is going to embody all this goodness and brightness and genius, and we're going to choose that. It's a ridiculous premise.
This is the process where it's going to be. Axelrod said, "Oh, the primaries are like an MRI that reveals the souls of the candidates." Okay, what absolute crap! We definitely had, we knew the souls.
The things we want to know.
He said, pointing to the
we want to know something about. We want to know something about intellect and decision making and insight and experience.
Thing is that you're watching candidates; they're changing their position rapidly, and then they're keeping and then this is my position now.
Yeah, well,
like about universal health care. Somebody that didn't support it, I'm not going to mention a certain candidate. And then suddenly they're supporting it, and they're all in.
But doesn't
it, where's the dissonance and where's the critics?
I think the idea that a nation of 330 million people will indulge, or the ones who do, and it's a smaller group, of course, will indulge in this exercise of examining candidates who are going to sort of be the embodiment of all that is great about the future of America. It's ridiculous. Now, it's easy for me because, in contrast, when I look at, I'm not a our current president is somebody that I strongly disapprove of. But be that as it may, it would be true of other presidents too. The idea that I listen to, President Trump's policy with regard to this, President Trump's plans with regard. Hey, hang on a minute. The guy doesn't have plans for anything. I mean, he has found some in the last 2 years, but what's his plan? He doesn't. The guy can't find a country on a map. He doesn't know where he is half the time.
Oh, Jim, come on. This man has a incredible grasp of history.
Yeah.
Little did I know that there were airports back in in British North America.
Yeah, that they captured the airport.
I guess that's why they failed in Quebec, right? When Benedict Arnold and Mad Anthony Wayne went up there. They couldn't seize the airport.
They didn't have paratroopers. But, I was the other day, you look at the lack of...
They should have tried Montreal.
This guy has got thousands of positions unmanned in the federal government, especially in the administration. You look at ambassadorships, right? We've no ambassador in Saudi Arabia. We've got no ambassador in Egypt. We've got no ambassador.
We have an ambassador to the Vatican. It's Callista. What's his name's wife? His third wife. Newt Gingrich.
Oh, Newt Gingrich's third wife.
Isn't that amazing to send the wife of a twice divorced ex-Protestant?
Right, send him to the Vatican. Yeah, well, I'm more concerned. I look at what's going on between the British government and
tell
Trump
us
today.
about that. What's going on with the British ambassador?
So the British ambassador had
first magistrate of the Republic.
The British ambassador had the gall to actually write some emails about the truth of the King's New Clothes story about. Back to the British government,
to the Crown,
the Crown, I guess. Well, the Crown is fake. So he said in his emails, which were never meant to go public. He says he talks about the Trump administration to the Prime Minister, which is his job,
and the Foreign Secretary.
He's here to, we're here to learn, and he sends the information back, and he says that the Trump administration is inept. Is one of the words he used for it. He said that President Trump oozes insecurity, and that there's a lack of policy and coherence. And as part of his report, he says, and we don't expect it to get any better. That this is an inept administration that is, their policies make no sense. There's no, you can't make sense of their Iranian policy, of their Korean policy. There are no policies.
And of course, the relationship between Britain and America is probably the most critical.
Yes.
That there is. Our intelligence communities were so close.
So today we get into it. So he of course, it's embarrassing for the British government that their ambassador's comments on the Trump administration are leaked.
Because that goes to the Foreign Secretary.
Just like here, of course, there's now the part of the story is they're going to have a constantly open inquiry into how come the emails were leaked. fine, you can have that inquiry. What surprises me? Well, a couple of things. First of all, the British Prime Minister says she's standing by her ambassador. That and she says it's unfortunate that these emails were revealed, but she's standing by her ambassador. He was doing his job. Meanwhile, Trump decides to attack the ambassador personally.
And now but we know Theresa May is not going to be the Prime Minister of it
after 2 weeks from today.
And who's the foreign minister now? They won't. The cabinet will be.
Well, the current foreign minister is one of the final two candidates for the.
This could be.
He could be the next prime minister, either him or Boris. I was going to say Yeltsin, him or
maybe Boris leaked it. That's the first name that comes up.
Well, but it seems like today, for the umpteenth time in the Trump administration, we have a diplomatic falling out and a war of words going on with Donald Trump calling the ambassador in the United States to the United States stupid, saying that he refuses to deal with him anymore. The British government saying that they have full confidence in their ambassador. Trump now starts calling Theresa May names, and this morning, he said that Theresa May had failed to follow his advice with regard to Brexit, and so she was a weak leader, and he couldn't wait for somebody else to come in. So now the foreign ministry in Britain is saying, hey, time out. You don't criticize our country and our prime minister and our people. So they call it petty and childish, etc. So,
after Churchill became PM, Lord Halifax, of course, was the runner-up.
Who he hated.
We talked about, and would have been a completely different situation, because Lord Halifax was considered by many an appeaser, or ready to appease. And didn't he become, because I think he was foreign secretary, but then they sent him to Washington, and FDR didn't like him.
Well,
then they had shuffled him out.
During the war,
but it was all kept under
at that time,
the lid.
So
he did not like Halifax.
During the
Churchill was and they got along very well.
My favorite story about Lord Halifax, when he was foreign secretary, because it was a national government, so you had to combine. It wasn't just the Labour or the Conservative Party; they combined to form a national government, which was led by the Prime Minister Churchill, and Lord Halifax was the foreign secretary. Well, they didn't like each other, and Churchill Churchill was a man of habit, and so he's in the bunker under number 10 Downing Street, in the war planning area and all this stuff going on, and it's raging in World War II. And he says to his servant, his secretary, whatever, I'm going to the bathroom. He probably used a more impolite word, and he said, because he was going to read his London Times, so he's in the bathroom in the bunker under number 10 when who arrives at the door of number 10 Downing Street but Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary. There was no love lost between them. So he demanded to see Churchill. And Churchill's assistant said, the Prime Minister said he cannot be disturbed. He's preoccupied at this time. But Halifax, full of pomp, said, I insist on seeing the Prime Minister. I am the Foreign Secretary. So after a battle, meekly, the servant goes down to the bunker and goes into the bathroom where Churchill is in a stall, squatting on a toilet bowl, smoking a cigar, reading his newspaper, and the servant, goes and knocks on the door of the bathroom, and Churchill growls at him, "What do you want?" And the servant says, "I'm sorry, but Lord Halifax is here, and he insists on seeing you." And Churchill responds, "Tell him I can only deal with one," expletive deleted, "at a time, SH1T. Tell him I can only deal with one SH1T at a time."
We like to use the word merde here.
Merde?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, merde for the French amongst us. So anyway.
Right. It's the same, but it doesn't have the word doesn't have the stink of the Anglo-Saxon.
It's amazing, though, that a government of sort of such dysfunction in some areas was able to manage a war process, and none of these things are...
It came close, though.
I mean, a lot of these things are, have you ever played the game of Risk or whatever?
I used to do it.
So like something, there's about impetus and opportunity. There's also the basics of sort of, if you were to view World War II based on access to supplies and materiel and military manufacturing power, the outcome was obvious from the beginning. Somebody was asked once, as you can probably quote who it was, and I've forgotten, what side is God on in any war? And the answer was God is on the side of the guy with the most tanks.
Oh, well, Gott mit uns is a German thing.
Was it?
God with us.
Yeah.
It's on their belt. Was a belt
Yeah.
buckle.
But the question is like whose side is God on in any war? And God is always on the side of the whoever's got the most tanks, because invariably in any war the people who win are the people with the most power, and it just happens to be that God's always on that side because that's the side that always wins.
How surprising for the Germans to find the T-34 tank, and Stalin they'd put out so many of them, and for years nobody knew about the turning point that the Battle of Kursk was. But we're getting down.
We're getting down into the
real memory hole there.
Yeah. So anyway, so there we go. So there's a spat on tonight between the British government and the U.S. government, and it'll be lost to what amazes me. What amazes me is that whether we're arguing about the women's U.S. national team and Miss Rapinoe, but I'm talking about the political piece and the arguments about it, and he's dumping. Again, he's the president of the United States. He's getting into spats with a lady soccer player
I've been gardening. Gardening. That's why I have to wear.
Well, she was asked.
My back's
as you probably know, the United States women's national soccer team won the World Cup.
Did they strip down to their brassieres again?
They never did. There was one lady who didn't strip down. I guess what she did was she pulled off her top.
They're still doing that?
It was one. I don't know where we're getting. It's very sort of sexist view of this. I think the opposite is true here. What we have here is we have the sort of emancipation, the full flowering, the development of sports that are across all genders.
I was coming to the studio, and I was thinking about Irwin Shaw's short story, All the Girls in Their Summer Dresses. I'm not ashamed.
Oh, okay.
To enjoy the female form in summer.
No, there's no shame in that whatsoever.
Of course, I'm a childless, dirty old man.
Yeah,
I think you're a father.
A father of
It's a different perspective.
And being the father of girls and boys, right?
You don't have I hope you haven't had the pleasure that I've had recently, finding out you are an old man.
Yeah, I try not. When I shave in the morning, I try to do it this way so I don't have to look and see that guy in the mirror, because
eyes are bigger than my grasp.
But anyway, so I just think that for a minute with the women's national team winning the World Cup. Well, he is in the way he did, but I just want.
It's a television show now. Yeah. Politics is a television show.
Well, only for him and
that on advertising driven.
It's
crazy.
It's a joke, but more a number of I've forgotten the exact number because I saw it for a moment and then I forgot it. But more than 1 billion people watched the United States win that game in that game,
which is considered football throughout the world except North America.
But I think what's important is that we are bursting through barriers as we're talking about glass ceilings and other things. This is another step, a measurable step along the way of full sort of equality.
What is
between sports for female and male athletes?
Women's sports are never going to be as big as male sports.
There were people who said there would never be
the World Cup.
No, because you're obviously now an old man. Because there was a time when people would have said that there's no way there are going to be more women in university than there are men.
No, that's not even equivalent.
But
that's not equivalent.
I think it's equivalent. There were people who believed that for many years. There is no reason. There's no connection whatsoever.
Jeff, do you know how much of America? Just let's talk about an American football team's worth, and what Manchester United's worth. These are huge.
Manchester United is worth exponentially more than what any
billions of dollars.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely.
And there's no contest.
No, there is a contest. I disagree with you because if you look
because you're politically correct.
No, it's not politically correct. These are measurable. It's that too. It happens to be that too. But it's
a demonstrable fact that tell me one female sport that makes money anywhere near parity
because we're moving. I said we're on steps along the way, measurable steps. And so
you mean when the men finally can say that they're women and compete?
I think when 1 billion people around the world are watching a program,
but it's
and
soccer.
on TV, then there are people who are going to pay to get at those 2 billion eyeballs.
Let's see them play rugby. I have seen them play rugby.
We're seeing it grow growing again and again and again, and we're going to see more and more of it. We see it across the board. The difference between pre-Title IX United States sports, and the United States deserves great credit here because we have led the world. We may have withdrawn from the Paris Accords. We may have not led the world in terms of solar energy, but we certainly have led the world in terms of the emancipation of women in sports and allowing girls to have the same level of access to sporting opportunities as men have had. And
I'm talking about professional sports.
Yes, professional and non-professional. So we have led the way, and this is something we should all be extremely proud of because this is a movement that started in the United States and is spreading across the world. And the world that my children and my grandchildren will grow up in and the opportunities they have is not recognizable from what it was 25 or 30 years ago.
You have no idea. There could be a reaction. Frequently there is. It could be a new dark ages.
Yeah, of course there could. We're living through one right now. I mean, so let's not, of course. But the inexorable march of
the
time.
only thing I vaguely heard that they were bitching about that Trump said something that women will never be paid parity to a male athlete.
Yeah, I don't know what he said. I don't know about
and that's
that
what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, well, he's not. How would he know? Just like
he would know. He wanted to have by the Buffalo Bills. If the NFL that hated his guts had allowed him to buy that, maybe we would have been. We would have been spared.
If a rubber check would have been able to be cashed, then he would have been able to do that. But he doesn't. He didn't have two dimes to put together. He never has that, other than what Daddy gave him. So and what he would do is he would do what he did with everything else. How many people do you know could actually own a casino or a few and lose money and shut them down? Here's the so-called businessman who's never really been a businessman. He's a real estate con artist, and a hustler. And if you like hustlers, then great. That's great. I think there's a certain level of admiration.
The hustler,
for that.
the con man is as American as apple
pie. Absolutely.
And if
many
you like great writers
great.
Like Thomas Mann, con man. Although he didn't write about an American con man.
So the
gold
idea,
bricking,
the
blue
idea,
skies.
When I hear people saying that we need a businessman to run the country, I mean I think maybe we want to talk about Jack Welch or Lee Iacocca or Steve Jobs or whoever you want.
Wendell Willkie,
and we're talking about the Morgan Stanleys and the whatever of the Vanderbilts or somebody.
He was a businessman, 1940.
Right. So those are businessmen, though. Right, to have this
George Romney, another one that didn't quite make it.
But this idea, perhaps a businessman would be great, perhaps not. But then when you don't have one, you have the pretense of one. So if the pageant, the Miss Universe pageant, and owning and sending casinos broke after buying them,
but
if that's the business, then
the United States is a television show. I don't know if you were on when Matt and I we ran a few times shows a couple of years ago. A 1956 or 7 interview with Aldous Huxley by Mike Wallace when he had this New York program.
The great Mike
and
Wallace,
he talked
80 or something.
about that was the first election where they really used TV. And Robert Montgomery, who was a well-known actor at the time, was Eisenhower's media advisor, and of course he's the father of Elizabeth Montgomery, who I crush on when I was a boy, Bewitched. But and he was talking about what media, because he was a great great futurist, and he talked about the distortions that this would create. But we reached the summa of this, where it's all television now. It's a television reality show. It's all predicated on ratings. This was a TV reality show star, and he's just a marketer. He could never really develop anything. But I think
the thing to understand about Trump is that whether by accident, which is the most likely, or by design, which is less likely, he has found himself in the new media age, Twitter, etc. Because the television age is gone. Now, we used to think and write about or read about the idea, that the Kennedy-Nixon debates,
isn't gone.
And that Kennedy had a better television presence and all that stuff. Well, today, the young people today, today's this generation, whichever is X, Y, Z, or back to A, they're not watching cable television. They're not watching CNN, CBS, etc. They're watching Netflix and Hulu and 1,000 other things, and they're watching video on demand. They're watching YouTube. And so, the idea, the Walter Cronkite era, sitting on network TV and capturing audiences at 11 o'clock at night, those days are gone. There's a few white-haired old men and women watching 60 Minutes a few hours a week, but after that...
Yeah, the days of 60 Minutes being the number one
show. So you could
50% of the people with a limited amount.
If you were, as a politician today, if you're commanding the television, if you could command it, it's like being in the 1950s commanding radio. Nobody's listening anymore. No, they aren't all sitting around the fireside with.
Well, you can't really say that, because in the sense that radio and radio talk shows had a far better impact, because people had passed the death sentence on them.
Right.
And I was with Murray Levin at BU. He wrote the first book about talk radio. He used to listen to it, and he anticipated the right-wing reaction that was coming from listening to it. So it was never as moribund as we thought. So television isn't quite dead. But when I'm reading about things now, it's like the Joe Biden problem. We all know Joe Biden. He doesn't even... He's shown for years what he is, what he can do, but the head of the Judiciary Committee, head of Formulations, or vice president.
Long history.
Long history. And that used to be valued, although nobody past the age of 60 would run generally, maybe in the early 60s. But you don't have 70. The only first 70-year-old man was Ike, and then Reagan.
Right.
But you had to be considered in your 50s, or people like Nixon was considered by he had experience in this. But now we're talking about, it's a different medium, and you touched on it. Because when you're reading about how young voters get their information, it is from Twitter, it is from social media, it's from platforms you and I probably don't even know about. And it's a different environment. It's more volatile. It's more, in a way, it's more manipulatable in a way. But it impacts the way the media is going to cover it, because that's becoming so important. Because the prime demographic in television, now we can go from television to media because it's bigger than that, 18 to 49. After 49, an advertiser doesn't want to have anything to do with you. But within the 18 to 49 demographic, the younger demographic is more valued. So you're having advertising-driven media. They're very conscious of this, because the Chinese are very conscious of it too. They're buying up small media companies and platforms.
Of course,
and it's creating a new dynamic.
But the irony is, of course, that the people, the legacy of the earlier age, the people who actually go out and vote in the largest numbers are the ones still watching network television.
Right.
But that's a dying breed.
Seniors used to, seniors always had such clubs.
The young, etc., are not. But this is something, this is why we have the issue with, Russian interference with media, etc., and anybody else it might be. I mean, people are operating in an echo chamber, and if you see the stuff that people believe nowadays, it's the fantasy is
with Cambridge Analytica. They only had to move a certain amount of votes.
Yes.
And with the machine learning and the ability to target people, because people are just freely giving up information. That's where Facebook can go with it's thinking of its cryptocurrency Libra, because which is different than Bitcoin, because it's going to be the value of Facebook. And what's its great value? That people are willing to give up all this information about themselves, which is monetizable. But
I remember in the I was first involved in politics in the late 1970s, and it was a non-computerized time.
Yeah. And they were computers, because Pat Cadell, but it was different.
Yeah, it was like ENIAC, right? It was a room filled of something. So the average political campaign didn't have access to that, and so it was still...
Yeah, it was too expensive.
But you had the advent of, media was starting with TV and all that stuff, but you had the advent of psychoanalysts and behavioralists and all that stuff on campaigns. And I was involved in a campaign, and the first time I saw this, and I was at the significant level in a campaign, and they were talking about. I was concerned about policy. I was a policy guy, and at around the table in the planning of this election, they were talking about the color of the tie of the prime minister candidate.
Yeah.
They were talking about the way the camera position, whether he should sit like from the side or to the front, all this stuff. And I'm like, what the hell? And I remember the guy. Sorry, he was a professor. I think of his name in a minute. He was a professor at University College Dublin, who was also a political advisor. And I was only a boy, but I had expressed my incredulity, and he said, you watch this. He said, we're going to have, and it was Gareth Fitzgerald. Dr. Gareth Fitzgerald was the candidate, and he said, we're going to change. And there was something with the way his hair was done, something with the color of his tie, and something else. And he said, watch the numbers change after the next debate. And so I was thinking we're going to debate. It was going to be about housing policy. It was going to be about foreign policy. It wasn't the environment back then. About labour policy, whatever. And lo and behold, this professor, a very, very smart man, he was absolutely right. We look when the numbers, of course, then you had to wait for the numbers to come in sometime later. It was nothing immediate. But the numbers came back, and with all our worry about the policy questions, it was the way he looked. It was all the things that they had changed that moved the number north.
Blue is much friendlier and creates a stronger reaction than red.
Oh,
and red was always the color of the Democrats or any party that skews socialist.
Right.
But then, for some reason, the media just flipped it in the year 2000 when they were doing stuff. And blue, actually, they say in research, that actually helps Democrats. And you're thinking, well, see, we know this, and it's true.
We know it's true now.
It shouldn't be a reality, but it is. Gary Hart. Gephardt, not Gary Hart, Monkey Business. Dick Gephardt had to dye his eyebrows because he was so blonde. He had blonde eyebrows.
Really?
And then the media, because it didn't look good on TV and everything, then the media jumps on that.
I remember being outside what was then the Verizon Centre, now the Southern New Hampshire University Centre in Manchester, back in probably, I'm guessing it was the Al Gore election.
2000.
It was George Bush too, right? So he came to town to do, and he had a rally at
Gore?
the Verizon Center. No, Bush.
Oh,
W. So W was coming to town, and so it was whatever. Who was running again? It was the end of his first term. He was running for a second time. It was 4 more years.
Oh, it was Kerry.
Kerry.
I was there. I interviewed Kerry right there.
Did you?
Yeah.
So I was standing outside, and there was a crowd had gone in, and we were outside and had some placards and stuff. There was a big crowd outside. The fun of living in New Hampshire and during presidential politics, if you like that kind of thing.
I did once, but I can't stand it anymore.
The cut and trust of it all.
After last time.
But anyway, so I was standing there, but I remember talking to people as they were coming out, and sort of a vox populi kind of thing, what was there. And I talked to this really nice lady. She came out, she was with 2 friends, and they were aglow, and she wasn't a Republican Party member, or, she wasn't she seemed that she wasn't ideological or anything else. But so I said to her, she said it was fantastic.
With W.
For W. She said it was fantastic. Now W, his stump speech was like 10 sentences that he repeated everywhere he went. And he had like 10 thoughts or 10 sentences.
Yeah, everything was a tax. We need a tax cut.
So he just
the Chinese are invading Taiwan.
So he never
sounds like we need a tax cut.
But he was W has this sort of I don't know what it is.
Imbecility. You feel he makes you feel.
He's
above him.
Yeah, he's a New England Brahmin, right? And he's like nuclear, and he's got the whole thing going. Anyway, but my point, this woman said to me, and I took her as being very earnest. And she said that she was undecided going in, and then I met her afterwards, and she said that as far as she was concerned, she'd made up her mind. She was voting for George Bush for president, and I said,
and he did. He won New Hampshire by 7,000 votes, and that gave him the presidency. Those 4 electoral college.
When I asked her,
so folks, it's important to vote,
it is,
even if you can't stand the other candidate.
But I asked her why, and this goes back to
our candidate.
This goes back to the conversation I was talking about having as a young man, as a teenager in the 1970s, and in my early days in politics, and thinking about policy and public policy, and I learned that lesson back then. 20, 30 years later, I'm in New Hampshire, and I still haven't learned it properly because this woman surprised me when she said it had nothing to do with his stance on NATO or the world or economics or anything. You know what? The thing I remember she saying to me was, I said, why? And she said, I like the cut of his jib.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck is that? There was something about him, he had a... meanwhile, you have what's his name?
Al Gore.
No, the other guy.
John Kerry.
John Kerry, who's like wandering around, sort of trying to capture the NRA vote, going shooting in an orange jacket someplace, and he rides in a motorcycle onto the late night show, going after the Harley. He had a Harley, and he rode up onto the stage on Jay Leno's show with a Harley Davidson, and he rides up onto because he's going after the Sturgis vote.
Yeah. So George H.W. Bush did the NASCAR thing.
Right. So meanwhile, the Sierra Club and some people who would derogatorily call them tree huggers, etc. Sort of the base of those who would have come out in strength to vote for him. He had nothing to say to them because he was going out. He was looking for these, other votes. And it has to go with how people feel about people. It's got nothing to do with policy and what their housing policy and urban development. Nobody really cares about it in the end.
I guess these Democratic debates, it's all just posturing.
Yeah,
it's all a beauty contest.
I would just take the word Democratic out of it with the debates.
Who knew all about beauty contests?
Right. Well,
This system doesn't work. You can read Louis Hart's
right.
the liberal tradition
in the last. I haven't watched the Democratic debates because I just can't. And
I remember seeing Marianne Williamson in Los Angeles with her New Age stuff.
I watched when I watched the Republican debates the last time.
Next time.
You can like them or not. Or if they're
that was
positions.
fun. The Republican.
But there were people. But there were people there. There were serious people there who had serious ideas. I mean, there was a contrast of views between.
You had La Grande Orange. Then you had Bat Boy, who used to be the Midnight Globe. That's the guy senator from Florida. Then you had Jughead Jones from the Archie comics, which was the senator from Texas. It didn't get any better than that.
You had Ted Cruz. You had Rubio. You had
Ted Cruz.
You had
Jughead.
The other Bush. What's his name?
They didn't matter. It was the Troika. You had Jughead Jones, which is Cruz. You had the Bat Boy from the Midnight Globe, which was Rubio, and then you had Trump. I mean, and they put them together. They had that three-shot. It was set up by the media. I talked to Martin O'Malley a little about the media and how they...
Poor Martin O'Malley. Where is he now?
He is in what Trotsky would call the crapper of history.
Is it?
Or is it the dustbin?
He was, So Martin O'Malley, a good Irishman too. He was of Irish, first generation.
Well, the Baltimore police took that young black man for a ride in the Black Mariah.
Oh yes,
and it was like on the Black and Tans era when you got into the Black Mariah and you didn't come out alive.
Right. But anyway, so it just goes to show that we can have all these debates about, when Trump said about I can walk down Fifth Avenue and I could shoot somebody and they'd still elect me. There was more truth in that statement than in anything else. And Jeb Bush was standing there thinking to himself, how am I being beaten by this guy who can't pronounce, African countries?
Right. He was impressive. I saw him. He's University of Texas, one of the top students there.
Yeah.
I'm a very liberal Democrat, and he was a conservative, more than his father, more conservative. But I was impressed by him, and I was there. We were interviewing him and stuff. It just all collapsed.
Yeah.
But it's the thing about I guess in the old days, from talking to you, that's probably the phenomena that came. The old media.
Right.
Is no longer the kingmaker.
Right.
There's all this media that's grown up around it. The decentralized
we have Ukraine, a country in great, peril and etc.
I almost F-bombed.
So but anyway, they elect an actor. A comedian actor who played the part of a prime minister. They elected him prime minister, president. So it's like what was the name of the guy who used to do the West Wing? Sheen, right?
Yeah.
Had he run, back in the
Martin
80s,
Sheen.
Martin Sheen, he probably could have won. It's
Well,
like,
we
you
had
know,
an actor for president, but
Well,
that
we
was a little
did.
different. He had been the governor of California for 8 years and been the head of a union.
Yeah, I remember reading about one of the things. I was wherever I was living in Europe at the time, and there was it was a surprise to a lot of people outside the United States that Ronald Reagan was going to be nominated for the presidency, and not just nominated, but then go on to win.
Yeah,
and,
I still am in shock.
yeah,
That
so
was 40
but so you know,
how many years ago?
yeah,
40
so
years ago.
it wasn't based on intellectual capacity. It was based, if anything, you could say about Reagan is that he had his finger on the pulse of American consciousness and the American.
No, I
the
think
American
it was just you had Jimmy Carter was incompetent. There was a horrible situation, and he. Once again, we have an actor, cool.
Yeah, I don't agree that Jimmy Carter was
comedian.
incompetent,
Oh, he was.
but no,
You want to call it an extent? He was.
I don't
He
agree.
was
I don't agree.
incompetent.
I don't agree.
Why would you say that? But that's a whole different
Yeah,
show.
it's a whole
He
different
was
show.
incompetent.
But I remember the thing, and this is not to be
And a
mean.
boom,
It's not to
too.
be mean to President Reagan.
Well, let's be mean.
No, but
mean
just
to
but the
President
reality
Reagan.
when people talked about him, I remember
he
the
was he was non compos mentis.
yeah, but certainly at the end he wasn't.
At
right?
the end,
Yeah,
after he got
what,
shot,
he didn't know what was going on a lot of the time. But
he was grievously
so
injured.
so the on one of these TV shows, at the time, and someone said the new president of the United States was elected last night, and he's going to be, his name is Ronald Reagan,
and he
of course,
had a minstrel show
and
at
people
the
knew him
first
uh,
inaugural.
yeah, people knew him as a cowboy, and a Western actor, TV actor. So the comment anyway was that on one, it was like the equivalent of a Saturday Night Live, and the guy who's playing the part of the new president of the United States, brand newly minted, this was his first, and they're interviewing him, and they say, "So, Mr. Reagan, President, what's your defense policy?" And he said, "Well, the first thing we're going to do is get those wagons into a circle." That was so they were saying that we have a cowboy.
Death Valley days.
But they were on, in the end, Reagan, time maketh the man and all that stuff, or
Oh,
opportunity. I don't
It's
know.
all BS. It's all
It probably
lies.
is. Probably is.
History's just more lies.
For years I used to think that these
He
people.
said adjusting his course.
I used to think there were really bright people, managing our lives, or maybe that's putting it too strongly, but, that people in charge, that there were wise heads somewhere deep inside pulling levers, and that we just got to see like the duck in water thing, and there was lots of, and it's as a slowly dawning realization.
There is, but
has
that doesn't mean
happened to
they're
me.
any more competent than
They're
anybody
not.
else.
Yeah, it's like it's
amazing that the
it's a-
army got through.
It's snafu, right? Situation normal. all
Without
bound up.
FDR was a great manager.
Yes,
he had
yes.
his, just like Churchill had hell dealing
Yeah.
with his military and his
Right.
ministers. FDR didn't have the trouble with his ministers, his
Right,
cabinet members,
right.
but he had trouble with the military. So they just didn't want to do what they didn't want to do.
Right.
And,
But he was a man of great intelligence and
yeah.
foresight. What
and
Churchill
he was a patrician.
and
Just
Chur-
like
as was Churchill.
an aristocrat, but Churchill had that added fillip that his mother was an American.
Yeah.
So he had a taste of American, because like de Gaulle told Kennedy, there were only two great British prime ministers, and neither one of them were British, because he didn't consider French. He didn't consider Disraeli British. He was Jewish, and he considered Churchill half American.
Well,
They didn't
sometimes
like each other
it's like when you go to play a game in a sport, right? Like you have a plan and you go.
Whether it's a
you
women's
go
sports
and you,
or men's sports.
Exactly, and you go and you execute the plan. If you're out there sort of responding to the other people and coping with the exigencies of the day and what happens and what not, what Churchill has, of course, is the singular view of a monarchic, future of like British
Of the empire. He wanted to preserve the empire.
and so he didn't have to think very long when a problem was posed to him, because he viewed it through this prism, through this lens, and it was tightly focused. He knew, it was Pax Britannica, the white man's burden,
He
the
didn't
British
raise that
Empire,
word.
and we did it to the Boers. We're going to do it to the Germans. We're going to win. We'll fight them on the
He was
beaches.
in the Boer War.
He was. He was
the
actually
correspondent.
he was captured and escaped while he was
Right.
in the Boer War. But where the first concentration camps in the world were developed for the Boer War, the British opened the first concentration camps in the world.
Yes.
But this idea of having this thing, it reminds me of in local politics, and when people say like sort of no new taxes or something, it's very easy. It doesn't matter if there's old folks who don't have housing, if there are poor people who don't have food.
We have a few minutes
You
left.
can just say, I have only one thing to say to you: vote for me, no new taxes. And it's like, all right,
There's
that explains
a
everything.
block of Republicans, I hear, that are going to be running for alderman, a block, and they're going to run like on a common platform on the tax cap.
Oh, good.
And you saw how, it's terrible. You know, how much percentage did the Board of Mayor and Aldermen go over? Like 0.3%? I mean, it's enough to, get your hankies out.
Well,
I just don't think it's going to be as big an issue as it was, like, when you had the big tax increases, which, I've talked to people like Pat Long, who was for those tax increases.
Yeah.
He was talking about campaigning with Bob Baines.
Right.
And Bob, you go door to door and people are yelling at Bob Baines about their tax
Yeah,
bill.
but we also
because you had the big increases
because
to cover schools.
Because we had schools with fungi growing in them, we had mold, we had ceilings leaking. If you read the report from last year, 2018, that's on the Manchester School website right now about the condition of about the cleanliness and the condition of our schools, because without tying it to results, we downsized the size of the contract with Aramark, the private cleaners, and so now we had an outside auditor come in, and we have evidence there.
That's right. There's no janitors were gone.
We got rid of them.
They call that domestic outsourcing.
Right. So we tried to outsource the food program now too. But in there, you read it, and it's on the website today to look at it. It's less than a year old, and that report talks about the fact that there are bathrooms in our schools that smell, where there's contagion coming from the bathrooms out onto the corridors because there's the waste from the bathrooms is being carried in people's shoes out into corridors, etc. That the storage of sanitation equipment is not right.
The cuts to the school system were a problem with safety that resulted in some horrific things happening.
There was a school in Manchester where Superintendent Vargas, at maybe his second or third ever walking into the schools to talk to people, and a teacher in the school told him that the city had repaired the sewer pipes in the bathroom above her classroom on 4 occasions, and the sewerage still managed to fail and break and leak into her classroom. That was the reality of schools in Manchester in 2017.
Fair, my niece and their husband teach in Lawrence, Mass, and it's when the wall starts opening and there's a big hole, they take the gunk that you just spray in, which I use sometimes. Like it's winter and all of a sudden you get a crack and you spraying it in.
Right.
So, but that's Lawrence, Mass.
Yeah, well, that's Lawrence, Mass.
You don't want Manchester. I'm not going to put down Lawrence because it's got its problems, but you wouldn't want to be the equivalent of a Lawrence.
As I said when I was
it certainly doesn't help sell your city to have schools like that.
I was talking about the fact that most of our aldermen are unaware of what's really happening in our schools, and they frankly don't really care that much because.
But they want to keep this huge gap between them and the school board, and the schools.
Well, we'll see if that
they don't
goes
want to
away
deal
now.
with it.
We'll see, and that's one of my in my decision-making process about whether to run for office or not.
I think you should run.
So my decision, part of it is about school board or board of mayor and all.
I think that of the people that you could win, because the other two candidates, the declared Democrats, I don't think they're strong enough.
At what position?
School board. Aren't you thinking of running for school board?
There's school board and alderman. I can run for anything. I could run for mayor if I wanted to.
Well, you can't run.
I think I can announce I won't be running for mayor, but
you're not going to run for school board at large.
It's a possibility. I'll be deciding it. It'll be in the news next week.
Alderman at large is a money intensive, and the money's already been sewed up.
Yeah.
We can talk about this after the show.
Depends on where you're looking for the money, but if you're looking for current sources.
Are you going to the EU? Blackpool money?
No, we'll be talking local money. I don't want to.
We'll use the old IC connection,
the
old school tie.
I'm not trying to just stuff changes.
It's to run for alderman. It costs a lot.
Yeah. I'm not worried about the cost. So that's not one of the considerations.
Well, Elizabeth Rupp and I were going to run for alderman at Huge, but little I know that's not really a position.
Yeah, so we'll see how things shake out over the coming
Nobody
week
wants
or two.
to take on Gerard, do you?
I don't know if he's running.
Anna Banfield or whatever is going after. There's a group called the Nellie May Education Foundation. I guess that they are radicalizing all our youth here in Manchester.
Where'd you hear all of that? What are you talking about?
Go on GerardAtLarge.com.
Oh, why would you go there?
Did you know that this is the Republicans? This is the vibe.
No. You said Gerard at Large.
Did you know that SNU is a dangerous radical organization? It's turning all of the kids there into dangerous communists.
I would believe there are people who believe that.
All this integration. Integration and stuff.
The funny thing is, you mentioned Miss Banfield. We have all these voices. We have all these voices that are not part of the Manchester. They're not the Manchester people. people, right? They're screaming from the seacoast.
All right, Jim. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Being here, everybody.
It was a pleasure.
I don't know what's going to be happening next week. Maybe they'll drop the bomb.
Next week we'll be sitting chatting about things, and we'll see what will go on. You might have news.
10 seconds. Can we count on? And
No
let's
news
say
tonight.
it for patriotism, right?
Yeah.
I don't
night.
celebrate the 4th of July.
You don't?
No.
Why?